Hello everybody, it is Nicole from iiKiui, and today I have a watercolor tips and tricks video for you guys. This video is sponsored by Skillshare. If you guys don't know, Skillshare is an online learning community with over 15,000 classes available, and they have many different subjects. They have subjects such as design, illustration, and they even have business and lifestyle subjects. Everyone can take a class, they can try a project, or even teach a class. Premium memberships start at $10 a month for unlimited access to learning. Because you guys are my subscribers, Skillshare has offered a free 2-month trial. All you have to do is click the link down below and enter the code iiKiui2. If you don't know how to spell that, it's iiKiui and the number 2. So the materials that I use for watercolor are 2 cups of water. Some use one for warm tones and one for cool tones, but I use one for washing my brushes and one for using on the watercolors. You need watercolors. I use the one in the pan, brushes, watercolor paper, and a paper towel for blotting and cleaning my brushes, and I also use a heat gun to speed up the drying process. So the videos that I use from Skillshare were Dan Lee's watercolor painting, create watercolor flowers, and that taught me some techniques on blending. I use Emma Riley Henderson's confident watercolors, dealing with mistakes, which taught me how to work with mistakes in the medium. On Mar Wynn's sketchbook practice, make everyday objects pop with watercolor and pen, which inspired me to sketch in watercolor. And I also use Emma Riley Henderson's watercolor story, practice the essentials, which is a really great video to start off with. I think it answers a lot of the questions about paint and paper types, techniques, and it's very inspirational when it comes to watercolors. So let's start off with the basics. Watercolor is a medium that is activated by water, hence the name. The more water you add, the less saturated it gets, meaning it will become lighter or more pastel. As you can see, I'm adding more water to the blue and it's getting lighter as I go down. So the first technique is wet on wet. Wet on wet deals with applying watercolor to a wet surface or applying it to another color which has not completely dried, hence the name wet on wet. This technique is mainly used when seamlessly blending 2 colors together, getting a gradient, or creating a soft edge. I learned this from the watercolor flower video because she used it to create a gradient between the petal colors and also create that soft edge that you want on a petal. You would have to apply the second color when the first one is still wet. Now the next technique is wet on dry. Wet on dry is when you apply watercolor to a dry surface, whether it be the dry paper or a color that has dried already. This can create a harder edge, and I use this technique when I want a color to stand out and pop. The colors are more saturated when applied in a wet on dry way. I also use the heat gun to speed up the drying process so I can apply color right away. I use the wet on wet technique to create a gradient. I slowly add more water to the top in order to get a smooth transition, and I begin adding the dark blue in this stage. But after I dry it, I add in the dark blue again to get the saturation up in order to create a higher contrast so that the gradient will seem more gradient. I also add water to the top and blot it a little bit with a paper towel to lift some of the color. This helps when creating a soft gradient as well. This can lighten the color at the top, and this technique is also used to fix mistakes. This is one that I learned from Emma Riley's video. However, blotting only works to a certain extent. On darker colors, it will not fix it completely, but it will lighten it. You can also add more water and blot with a paper towel in order to lift the color more. However, if that doesn't work, the next step is to see how you can incorporate the mistake into the artwork. Lots of artists find that in the end, their mistake helped improve their drawing and sometimes even challenge them to think outside of the box. Of course, if you don't like it, you can cover it up. You can use different mediums like gouache, acrylic paint, or even gesso, anything that is opaque, which means it's not see-through, and you can apply it over the mistake. I use this technique in the end in order to clean up the border of my painting. I actually learned quite a lot from these videos, and I got really inspired to experiment more with watercolors. I think that this piece was very successful, and in my opinion, I believe I improved in the medium. It's definitely got me a little more comfortable with watercolors because initially I didn't really experiment much with the medium. I just knew that if I wanted this color, I would apply water to it and I would get the color. But seeing the different videos and the different advice that people give, techniques, and how they use it really inspired me to work more with the medium and use these techniques. For example, in the hair of the mermaid, I used a wet on wet in combination with a wet on dry technique. For the blending of the hair, when I did the purple blending into the blue, at some points I did a wet on wet when I wanted it to have a smooth transition, but in the parts that I wanted the strands to look separated, or at least not one big blob, I would do a wet on dry technique so that they would stand out. For the coral in the front, I use a lot of wet on wet technique, especially when blending in colors. I actually didn't know what I was going to do initially, so when I blended colors, I did it on a whim. I blended the purples and pinks and oranges together, and I was actually really surprised at how seamlessly they blended together. If you haven't watched my videos before, but you would know that I have a hard time putting in contrast, and seeing these different techniques and applying them and actually seeing how they work in the final product helped me put in more contrast into my painting. I really enjoyed painting the coral in the front, but I also really enjoyed doing the background because I've always had a difficult time creating gradients for large pieces, and this piece of watercolor paper is not small. I think it's about 11 by 17, so it's a bigger piece. And I've always had difficulty making it look smooth. And for this one, I was going for a more blotchy look. I wasn't going for a very smooth transition, but combining both the wet on wet technique when I wanted to create that subtle gradient, while also combining the wet on dry technique where I wanted to darken the edge and darken the color in the back to make it pop, really helped me. And even though I thought I knew about these techniques before, I never knew how to apply them. So knowing how to apply them into your artwork is actually really important, which I should have done before I even picked up the watercolors, but I learned along the way. I'm hoping that this inspires you to get more into watercolors or experiment more with them. After learning about all these techniques and applying them to this piece and seeing the results and how they can really affect how the final piece looks is really rewarding. I definitely want to sketch more in watercolor, but I would need to practice. Maybe you'll see some in some future sketchbook tours. But that's about all I have to say for this piece. I really like how it turned out. I think I said that like 5 times, but I learned so much, and the color blending and applying all these different colors and experimenting was really fun, but also a very good learning process. I think I learned so much in this one painting than I have in all my other paintings combined, because in this one I really tried to push myself and challenge myself to use these techniques and use things that I've learned and do something outside of my comfort zone, because I have never done an underwater ocean scene with a background. I mean, usually I just do a character, but there's a background in this one, and I'm really proud of myself. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching me paint this and learning along with me. It was really fun to sit down and just do a large painting again. I haven't done that in quite some time, but applying everything that I learned and taking the time to actually do it, I think it shows through in the piece itself. So I hope you guys enjoyed this watercolor tips and trick video. I hope it was helpful and inspire you to try watercolor of your own if you haven't already, but if you have, then I hope it will inspire you to keep going at it. It's still a new medium to me, so I'm still learning how to use it and learning new techniques, but with these Skillshare videos, they really helped me get out of my comfort zone and try something new. So thank you again, Skillshare, for sponsoring this video. I highly recommend looking through their watercolor section. When I first browsed through the classes, I saved like 200 of them. Not that I have the time to watch them now, but hopefully I can watch them soon. And also don't forget, if you want a 2-month free trial, click the link down below and enter the code iiKiui2. That's iiKiui and the number 2. So thank you guys all for joining me today. I hope you guys all enjoyed. Keep drawing, keep painting, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!